My Hero Academia manga chapter 325 has been officially translated, and let's just say that there wasn't that many differences between the official and unofficial translations that drastically changes the story moving forward. So for the most part in this video, I'm actually going to be discussing a few things that I didn't notice when I first read it and potential implications for what's going to be going on in the next few chapters, and I'll do that right after this intro. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Man Drew, here to discuss the most recent chapter of My Hero Academia, manga chapter 325, The Bonds of One for All. So if that title didn't give it away, most of this chapter was focusing on everything that has happened in the story so far, accumulating into this one point where, for the most part, the audience comes to a realization that, yeah, they need to stop being bystanders. And in this chapter, they stop doing that. So pretty much for the most part, this is going to be the end of Class 1A, returning Deku to UA, as well as Deku fighting off the vigilantes on his own, as well as Deku fighting off the villains on his own. So that's pretty much done in this chapter. So in this video, I want to discuss a little bit more about what's going to be going on within the next few chapters or for the rest of this saga, as well as tell you the differences between the official and unofficial translations like I always do. And for the most part, the translation differences in this chapter do not really take away anything from the chapter like other differences do. There are some that are very minute, so I won't be going over the entire chapter as like a somewhat summary. I'll only go into those small differences so that I can immediately go into this discussion later on, so we'll start with that. To start off, the first difference between the official and unofficial translation actually comes out during that Starman speech. You know, the guy that has like the multiple stars on his head or shuriken or whatever the heck that is. He begins giving his speech. So pretty much everything from the beginning up until that moment is pretty much the same. But then the only real difference between both the official and unofficial translations comes in with what this one random guy says involving Shiketsu. Because in the unofficial translation, this random guy says that Shiketsu is just as equipped as UA, and why can't he go there, where you just have another lady say that, well, that's just pushing the problem onto someone else. While in the official translation, as this random guy still brings up the idea that Shiketsu has the same setup, the woman doesn't say that it's pushing the problem onto someone else, but she says that they would react the exact same way as they are over there. And when it comes to the impact of these implications, they have a pretty similar impact, but I think it makes more sense to say that they would react the exact same way as we would, instead of just saying, oh, we're pushing the problem onto them. Both of those are accurate, but I think that what is said in the official translation is a little bit more accurate and a little bit more realistic, because that is something that we've seen. We've seen how UA reacts to Deku coming in, and it's one of the most fortified fortresses, so putting Deku somewhere else that is less fortified will probably have the people reacting, if not very similar, even more harshly. So if anything, I think it may be a little bit more impactful in the official translation than in the unofficial translations. Then the next difference in translations comes from this one guy that we've seen over the past 2 to 3 chapters that is always like the instigator of trying to have everyone yelling at this little kid. He finally begins to come around, but there is a difference in what he says in this panels. Because in the unofficial translation, he brings up how Deku has multiple quirks and how he was serving as a decoy for the villains and how some may call him a true hero. But in the official translation, he doesn't bring up the fact that Deku was a decoy, but he says that Deku may have been an agent for the villains, or that he was a true hero when it comes to how people are talking about it. And it just makes sense in the official translation for how he said it than in the unofficial translation, mainly because the only way the civilians would have known that Deku was a decoy was in this moment where Bestian has pretty much told them straight up. But the implication of what this guy is saying is that this is talks that people were having before Bestian made the speech. So it makes sense for them to believe that he may have been connected to the villains as an agent instead of being a decoy to lure out the villains. So the official translation just makes a little bit more sense than in the unofficial translation. And pretty much from that point on, up until the next difference, pretty much everything is the same. Deku pretty much says the exact same thing. Ectoplasm brings Endeavor, Hawks, as well as Shoto into the UA barrier. And the small difference that I want to bring up is how Hawks pretty much describes One for All, about how Endeavor in the unofficial translation talks about how this progress was just a detour, where Hawks responds with, if you're talking about the progress, this is a step moving forward. That is what is stated in the unofficial translation, but in the official translation, Endeavor just says that they pretty much haven't made progress for what they did to Deku, to which Hawks responds with no progress question mark. He disagrees, and then that's when we get into the description of One for All, which, even though the wording is different, it still conveys the exact same meaning. So it's just a slight difference and clarification. Instead of just going a roundabout way of just saying no in the unofficial translations, they just pretty much say that Hawks disagree with what Endeavor said. So that's something interesting. And now we're pretty much jumping towards the end of this chapter, where we get pretty much the last difference between the official and unofficial translation, and it pertains to after we get the reintroduction of Aizawa in this chapter, we have the confirmation of where the Nomu, or specifically where Kurogiri, is in relation to the story. Because in the unofficial translations, they specifically say that they secretly transported Kurogiri, and only Kurogiri, to Central Hospital for reconstructive research. But in the official translations, they say that they shipped some Nomu, Kurogiri included, to Central Hospital for the secret reconstructive research. So it's very different and very minute, but it does could play a potential bigger role in this arc, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, as well as a few other things in this chapter. But in the official translations, they're implying that they're not just working on Kurogiri, but they're also working on the other Nomu. So they're potentially going to be doing research on potentially how to get Kurogiri back, but potentially get the other Nomu back to a state where they may be a little bit more human, and they won't be fully controlled by All for One. So that's going to be cool in comparison to the unofficial translation, which just brings up Kurogiri. And something else that you would notice is that we also see a secondary Nomu in a body bag. So it makes more sense for them to be doing it more on just Kurogiri in the Nomu as a whole, and not just Kurogiri in the unofficial translations. So yeah, with that out the way, I want to get into a few things that I may have missed in this chapter. And from what I've noticed and what I've watched, there's only two really differences that I really didn't tackle in the actual review, or that I didn't notice. And the first one I want to tackle is the idea that Kurogiri's quirk is the same quirk that was in Johnny or Masaku, the one of the little smaller Nomus, one of them that had twice his quirk, which was double, and the other one, which is pretty much confirmed in this chapter, is the quirk that Kurogiri has. And that's very weird, because the quirk that they're talking about is the one that just spills out of the people's mouth. We've only seen it with the League of Villains. This black goo spills out of their mouth and transports them to where Dr. Garaki was. We first saw that we pretty much saw that goo substance for the first time when Endeavor and all of them tried to apprehend the League of Villains, but they were able to escape. And then that they were able to use that black goo, but they were also able to use Kurogiri to escape. But from what we see in this chapter, it's implying that Kurogiri's quirk is the same as that one small Nomu with the black goop. And that doesn't make sense until you remember that potentially what happened with their quirk is that Kurogiri's quirk, which if you remember correctly, is the quirk of Shirakumo, which, if you read Vigilantes, you know is a cloud-based quirk, which is why most likely Kurogiri is primarily made of cloud. And I'm fairly certain that when it comes to what was stated, they pretty much stated that Kurogiri's quirk is not the same as what Shirakumo's was, but that it's a little bit different, and that difference could come from the fact that maybe Shirakumo's quirk merged with the black sludge transportation quirk to create this new quirk, which allows for them to be transported to different places, not by spitting up the goo, but through the cloud. So that's probably something that I didn't miss. So potentially, if they do bring back Shirakumo, or rework the memories inside of Kurogiri, because we do know that Shirakumo's essence and personality is in there, so he may sort of come back, but he may not be fully the same person. So it would be cool if that was the case. But yeah, it's just a very cool implication that I really didn't bring up in the review, so I'm bringing it up now. Something else that came to my attention by watching a few other people is the scene where you have Shoto, who brings up the idea of how if we're gonna do this together, we're gonna do it together, in reference to both Shoto and Endeavor taking down Dabi. As you have Endeavor just agreeing with him, yeah, but he's like looking away and shading his eyes. And we're gonna talk about that shading of the eyes when it comes to All Might at the end, but an implication that I didn't think of at first is that he's potentially lying to him, and how this could be leading to, oh yeah, Endeavor's gonna work with Shoto to defeat Dabi and bring him back. Or it could mean that when he's lying about them working together, that Endeavor's gonna take it upon himself to fight Dabi, and there's an idea of where they're going to be fighting, and it's going to be in the old Shoto Todoroki home, which when I heard that, I'm like, that would be amazing. But if I could put my take on it, many people are saying that Endeavor is going to die with Dabi, or that Shoto's going to fight him first and then Endeavor's going to come in to save the day. I think that would be cool, but what I think is going to happen, and I brought this up in a later discussion video, what I think is that they're obviously going to be fighting at the Endeavor household, but what I think would be more thematically relevant is if Dabi were to die, but not by Endeavor's hands, but by Shoto's. And that Dabi is going to successfully kill Endeavor and attempt to kill Shoto, but Shoto's going to be fighting back and trying to kill Dabi and will probably be successful. But this also ties into a later matchup that I have with Shoto, which is that it's going to be Shoto versus Dabi and Getten. Shoto is going to literally be fighting his brother that has a greater firepower and someone that can literally control ice. And I think it would be very cool if he does kill Dabi and defeats Getten, but I think it will be very thematically relevant to have the kid that is both fire and ice defeat probably the most powerful fire and ice users, showing that, yeah, even though he did become born into this due to the actions of Endeavor, that the only reason why he was able to achieve that is through his own skill and his own drive and motivation to be a hero. So it just makes sense for Shoto's fight to be a 2-on-1, because he pretty much has two quirks in one, the fire and the ice quirk, and it just makes sense for him to go up against the fire and ice user. And I think most likely what would happen is that during the final fight, when they're about to clash, Shoto uses his fire and ice at the same time, but the difference would be he uses his ice quirk on Dabi, and Dabi isn't able to melt it in time, and Shoto uses his fire quirk against Getten, and Getten uses the ice to block it, but Shoto's firepower is so powerful that it melts through all the ice and he defeats them in one instance. That's kind of how I see the fight going, and potentially Dabi is going to die after that, or he somehow commits suicide by accidentally burning himself alive, which, as we've seen, that's pretty much what he's doing throughout the entire series. So that's my take on that idea, and that all comes from this idea that Endeavor is lying to Shoto in this chapter about working together to fight and rescue Dabi, where he may do it himself, he may sacrifice himself as it being atonement for everything that he does, so that Shoto doesn't get involved, but unfortunately gets involved anyway. So that's kind of my idea on that. So yeah, that's pretty much tying to the last part of this chapter, and it's primarily going to be focused on what's going on with All Might, as we see that he's pretty much leaving UA, and we can kind of see that through his eyes, but there's a few different implications for that. The first and probably the most likely implication is that All Might is going to be leaving UA because of what he heard from Uraraka and this random civilian, and that he believes that the reasoning why all of this is happening, why Hero Society is in this state of panic and horror, and he may realize that he's right about this, and we as the readers are probably going to have to agree with him. So what I'm saying is that because of everything that's going on, All Might is trying to remove himself from the equation, so that instead of people trying to rely on him and seeing the failures of their past involving him, so that they can look towards the future and build a better society that doesn't involve All Might and what he did. So what I'm pretty much thinking is going to be happening is that All Might is going to try and get away from UA and not go back and not remind the people of the failures of Hero Society that he pretty much caused. And this could lead to him sacrificing himself for Deku eventually later, because most likely Deku is going to go on a rescue mission to try and rescue All Might. He's most likely going to fail, which is going to lead to All Might's death, which ties into a theory that I have that as soon as All Might dies, that is when Deku is going to fully unlock One for All and he will become the full vestige inside, and All Might will disappear completely, which will give Deku even greater motivation to fight Shigaraki. But it could complicate it, because if Shigaraki's the one that kills him, then it's gonna have him have a conflict of interest of wanting to save the person that killed his master. Hence, most likely what All Might have to go through with All For One, because All For One was also the one that killed his master. So the parallels would be there. And the second implication of this panel could be that this is an All Might. That this could be someone else taking on the disguise of All Might, because we don't see his eyes. We normally see his eyes in this sullen state unless he's specifically hiding them, or Horikoshi is trying to hide the eyes from us, because maybe this isn't All Might, maybe this isn't Toshinori, maybe this is Toga. Because here's the thing, immediately before we see this scene, we see both Nezu as well as Eraserhead Aizawa talk about the plans that are in place that prevents Toga from infiltrating any facility, that certain people that want to get into UA must be isolated first so that they can eventually have the time wait out to see if that individual is Toga so that they can capture it. But what if Toga turns into someone that was already in the UA before they implemented these plans? Someone like All Might. And you may be thinking, well, we haven't seen Toga at all. We've only seen another character. We've only seen, the last person we've seen interact with All Might was Stain. So wouldn't it make more sense for Stain to be involved? And I would agree with you, except we have to remember Toga's quirk. Toga has the ability to not only like take in blood and transform into people, but transform into people with their same quirks if she loves them. And we know that she loved Uraraka, she loves Deku, but the first person that we really saw her love come into fruition is with Stain. So what if she obtains the blood of Stain, and because she loves Stain, she's able to use his blood ability, and if she does that and cuts All Might and then is able to like get a drop of his blood, she would not only have the quirk to paralyze him with whatever blood type he has, but once he's paralyzed, she'll be able to drain his blood, which then she could use to transform into Toshinori, into All Might, and infiltrate UA. Now, that may be a long shot, but it's not impossible. And I think that that would be a cool way of getting Toga into UA and having conflict not just with Uraraka, but with Deku, where that could be the moment where Toga either switches sides or she begins to question whether or not she really wants to be a villain or if she really wants to help Shigaraki destroy the world. So that's just an interesting theory that I have. Do I think that it's possible? Sure, but do I think that is really going to happen? Not really. I would like for it to happen, but I'm really leaning on more of All Might leaving UA, not returning because he feels guilty because he may have been the cause for Hero Society being in the state that it's in, and that would eventually lead to his death, which would lead to Deku obtaining the full power of One For All. So yeah, that's all I really wanted to discuss in this video. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you were able to catch on to the things that I missed, because like I said, I didn't catch on to them for the first time, but maybe you did. So if you did, leave your comments down below and leave your comments on what do you think is going to be happening in the next chapter, because I think either we're going to be focusing on the villains next chapter because we brought up Toga in this chapter, we may be focusing on the confrontation between Stain and All Might that we didn't see, or we may see a little bit more of Deku beginning to heal and being taken into UA, where we'll get a little bit more conversation between Class 1A and Deku, as well as everyone talking about what really One For All is, and them all being led into the know. So yeah, leave your thoughts down in the comments down below. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you like this type of content. Leave a like on this video if you liked it, and hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I upload more content like this. Do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye!